MCU Need to Know, a podcast dedicated to the Marvel Cinematic Universe and everything you need to know. I'm Trey.
I'm Jude. How you doing, Trey?
I am doing pretty fantastic. Incredibly excited because we're back to MCU proper.
Yeah. You know what? I think this is our first MCU proper review.
Right.
Yeah. I'm excited. This is awesome stuff.
Mm-hmm. So it's been a couple weeks of doing some more of the topic-based episodes, and it felt really good to kind of like take notes again, kind of like we were doing with Daredevil.
Hang on. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you.
Really good podcasts have wine.
Okay. Just as you were saying that, the door opened and hit the laundry hamper that is my desk in the closet for the laptop. And and the hand comes in holding this glass of wine saying, really good podcast, have wine. So
there's our endorsement.
So yeah, I'm sorry, I interrupted you. What did you say?
I was just saying it felt good to kind of be taking notes again.
Yes,
after
it
having...
did. It did.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I did.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Yes, it did feel notes. It did feel notes. It did feel good. I haven't even had a sip of the wine yet. It did feel good to take notes again.
So yeah, that's had me pretty excited. But how have you been?
You know what? It's been good. I'm glad it's Friday. We're pulled back the curtains a little bit. We're normally recording Thursday nights, recording on Friday night tonight. Glad it's the weekend. I understand you got to go back to work, but I don't, and it was a long week, so I'm happy.
That's good. I'm glad you're getting the break, man. I know things have been really rough. Like you've said before, you're a teacher. Things are tumultuous right now, so I hope you get to take advantage of that.
Well, you know what? We had students. We had this weird kind of system. I'm not going to dive into it here. But I'll tell you what, for all the stress that the week had leading up to the official first day, having the students was great. And I know each day that goes by as getting to interact with the students again, because I feel comfortable saying this of teachers, like that's why we do it, for the students, right? Mm-hmm. And each day that goes by that you get to interact with them, it's great. It just gets better.
Yeah. And I know it's probably not the same set of kids from last time, but I mean, I know there's had to be lingering feelings of the abruptness of being on spring break and then the year's just over.
Yeah,
from last semester.
Yeah, there was a little bit about that. It was nice. Well, I mean, to be honest, because I get some repeat students, for the grade levels I teach. And so seeing them again is nice, but, even running into the halls of ones that I don't have as a repeat. And you just didn't get the end of last year, get to say a proper goodbye, at the end of the year. And so getting to see them again is really cool.
Yeah. So I'm glad you get to get that. But but before we jump into our main topic of Iron Man this week, I would like to take this time to say that if you haven't already, if you could take the time to leave us a review on your podcast platform of choice, we'd greatly appreciate it. Leave us a review and a star rating. It really helps the podcast grow in the ranks and helps us be discovered by new listeners. So, like I said, we're finally diving into the MCU proper this week. We are taking on none other than Iron Man, the first movie in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Okay, we've talked about this once before, so let me ask. You saw this in the theater, right?
I did.
Okay,
yes. And
you remember that experience?
I do, because I was very reluctant to see it.
That's right. You were kind of, saw the trailer and you were kind of, but it ended up...
I'm over superheroes.
Yeah, but ended up loving it. Okay, because we talked about this. All right, yeah.
What about you? Did you see this one in theater?
I did. This was one I was excited to see in the theater. And came in town, watched it. Remember I talked about it on a podcast about my wife and my sister going to see Sex and the City or Sex and the City 2, whichever one it was. And my wife being scandalized that she took my little sister to go see that.
Oh man. So yeah, we've been talking about this, how we know when we talked about Daredevil, we did do it as a scene-by-scene breakdown, but with those being about, 45 minutes to an hour-long episodes, that felt a little bit more doable than this 2-hour-plus movie. So the way we're going to handle this today is we have broken up this movie into 3 parts. So the first part that we're going to be discussing deals with Tony being captured all the way to the point of rescue. Part 2 is going to deal with the moment of the press conference when he's rescued all the way until his mission in Gulmira. And then finally, the third part will deal with him coming home and Pepper finding him taking out the suit all the way to the finale of the movie.
A good 3-act structure.
Yeah. So in this first part, I think one of the first things that I wanted to bring up that I remember being really impressed with in this rewatch is so much of this movie, I think, relies on that reveal with Obadiah in the end.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I've heard criticisms before how it feels like it goes a little off the deep end with the extent to which Obadiah kind of becomes the villain at the end.
Right.
But I knowing that now in this rewatch, I think the thing I found so impressive is when they were doing that, after Tony's been captured and all that, and they're having the flashback scene of him winning the award, and they had like that infographic, like detailing everything we needed to know about Tony Stark.
Uh-huh.
The way they were visually able to tell that story between Tony and Obadiah, where they had the like Obadiah stepped in when Howard Stark passed on and he managed the company. And so there you see Obadiah on the magazine cover and he's alone. Then Tony comes in, he's kind of young, they're sharing the cover. And then the next cover is Obadiah kind of in the background and Tony taking center stage. And then finally the last cover that show is just straight up Tony Stark. So without them even having to show Obadiah and Tony interacting, they did such a great job of planting that seed of jealousy between them.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in that one cover, the look of Obadiah towards Stark as he came to the front, you started to get hints of that. But even Obadiah's line is full of jealousy because Stark gets up for the award, or phrase that, Stark doesn't show for the award, and Obadiah's line is, I'm not Tony Stark, but if I were, right, and it's not on behalf of the company, on behalf of Stark, it's I'm not Tony Stark, but if I were. Like, it's clearly, and I don't think I recognized that the first time I watched it, like all the way back in the theater, as much as I did this time around.
It's the benefits of being able to rewatch stuff is so much more fun, especially in the cinematic universe where it gets rewarded.
Right. And not that I didn't recognize the jealousy, but like that line in particular, just kind of like that award should be mine thing,
That's an interesting way to look at it. Yeah. Especially the way he kind of like is reveling at the trophy before he even starts to address the crowd.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
A couple of things I found I loved about this opening is just, well, I got 2 things in mind now. One of the things I like is how we talked about a lot with the Daredevil, the efficiency of storytelling and how they give you a lot of information just visually and stuff like that. And you see very quickly how, like, in a weird way, Stark Industries made him, Tony Stark, who he is. But it's also what did him in, right? Like, it was literally he gets out of the Humvee, he hides behind the rock, and the dud, well, it wasn't even a dud, it blew up, but it's just late. So we got to see and focus in. There's a Stark Industry weapon. And like that is kind of what did him in as well, Stark Industries, which I really liked. Kind of that this is what himself and Stark Industries is what put him in that position, or the cave he had to climb out of.
And and so much of Tony's growth in this movie is recognizing the responsibility of his family's legacy. The fact that, his father helped create these weapons, he profited off the selling these weapons for war. And for so much of that early part of the film, like, he gave no mind to that, and kind of playing in that space about how demonstrating that Stark Industries was both his making and undoing. They did a very good job of this visually as well. Whenever he was displaying the large missile, which I'm blanking on the name at the moment.
Jericho?
The Jericho, thank you. Whenever they were demonstrating the Jericho, he was up there and he was giving like his rehearsed speech about like how, I say the best weapon's the weapon you only have to fire once. And it's very clinical in his delivery. He has the big showmanship where he has his arms outstretched, the bomb goes off, and then the way that he's kind of caught off guard by it a little bit after the explosion
Uh-huh.
and the aftershock. It's just such a great way to say, like, he's not even taking into account how powerful these weapons are.
Right.
And he's caught off guard with it.
Yeah.
And then immediately goes and grabs a drink.
Yeah, that's a nice touch. To peace. Yeah. Yeah. That's a nice touch.
Mm-hmm.
You know what? I'm going to step out a little bit of that moment. I always, in the first watch, didn't think about it, but now it's like, man, do they really have to go out there to test the weapon? Like, go overseas? Where is that? Like, don't we have weapons testing sites in much that's not military hotspots?
That is a very good point. Yeah.
Just throwing that out there. It doesn't hurt me watching the movie, but that was something that's always kind of picked at the back of my mind.
It completely undoes the entirety of the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
It does. We're packing up, go home. Never gonna watch the movies again. Call it a night. You know. Now, while I was stepping outside of it, I remember, seeing Stark's tech. And I'm getting a little bit ahead of the scene, and I'm not trying to get ahead of us, but like the first time you see Jarvis at his apartment, Tony Stark doesn't live in an apartment, at his house,
Jarvis might live in an apartment.
Yeah, but like, so like you have you see that in there, but even go back to the scenes we're talking about, and you have that flip phone, but he's doing video, and the tech there was so, I remember watching it and thinking it was so advanced, but now you watch it and it's like, that's a really small screen and you're on a flip phone, and then seeing where Jarvis ended up, from those first moments, you get introduced to Jarvis. It's interesting how the tech over time is, I don't think it takes away from my viewing experience. I jotted down, it's like, I hope this doesn't show up on MySpace. I'm assuming that was a partnership at the time.
100%.
Yeah.
You know how I know?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Because like the very first trailer I ever saw for Iron Man was a MySpace bulletin post ad where it was the "sometimes you have to run before you walk" clip.
Yeah,
and that's the first time I saw an Iron Man promotion.
Right. So, but I don't feel like a lot of times movies, it's kind of detriment to it, right? When you watch it and you're like, oh, that's a bit dated. I didn't feel that though. And I don't know if it was just because I'm forgiving it because it's the MCU, but I didn't feel like, oh, that's dated. It just is.
It is dated. I guess dated has a pejorative feel to it. Whenever you talk about a movie being dated, it's like, oh, it's not up to snuff. I think the thing that the MCU has going for it, and again, we could totally be MCU apologists here, but the thing that makes it okay is because since these do exist on a continuity, it's not dated. You're just seeing the evolution from where it was to where it gets to eventually.
Right.
And because, I had a similar feeling. Like whenever Tony, even the fact that at the very beginning when the soldier's like, hey, can we take a picture? They don't pull out their phone to take a picture. It's like a little snapshot. Like
it is that point and shoot camera. Yeah.
Right. And so there's definitely so much of that grounds it specifically in that 2008 period. And to me, it's almost endearing instead of the pejorative sense of dated.
Yeah. Well, and I don't mean, and again, I'm not trying to talk down about the movie.
Right.
I mean, some of my favorite movies were made in the 80s, So yeah. So, and I mean, you want to talk about dated, when they're, look at Captain Marvel when they dated intentionally and she's running to a payphone, and go back to those 80s movies when they're going to a payphone, and that's, because that's what you do at that time. So yeah, so it's
so many of those movies could have been solved with a cell phone.
I know, right? But so I'm not trying to there, but it's like it didn't bother me though, and it didn't take away from the experience of like, oh, you mentioned MySpace and it's not a thing or whatever.
So you did mention the introduction of Jarvis, which, if I'm not mistaken, that's when we finally get a glimpse of Tony's garage, his workspace.
Yeah.
One of the things that I really enjoyed about this first part of the movie is the way they established that garage as it's his safe space. Like it's where he can be his most vulnerable. Because throughout so much of this early part, we're seeing Tony, like his wit is on full display, And you can see the way that he uses it as a defense mechanism, specifically when he's having the interview with Everhart about like, well, how do you sleep at night when, you know, you're making money off all these weapons you sell? You know, he's kind of got like a distance that he's keeping people at. But here we see him being a little bit more open with Pepper. And I think the way they kind of subconsciously cement this is one of the things that I notice is that he's working on that hot rod, right?
Right. Yeah.
And Tony's so often called the tinkerer or the mechanic. Like, we know that's where he's at his best. And while he's working on that, in the bottom right corner of the frame, you can see there's a picture of his dad also working on a hot rod. And I like that they solidified that there.
Yeah. Well, and again, it's that well done storytelling. What I find fascinating in you bringing that up is the song playing, I believe, was a song called Institutionalized by Suicidal Tendencies. And that's what I really focused in on in that scene is those lyrics. So actually in my research, I pulled up some lyrics. Sometimes I try to do things and it just doesn't work out the way I want it to. And I get real frustrated and I'm like, I try to do it or I try hard to do it. And I'm like, I take my time and it doesn't work out the way I wanted to. And it's like, I concentrate real hard. And like, it's almost like that internal, like it felt to me like this internal monologue as he's tinkering with this hot rod, you know? And then projecting out and knowing how getting into Iron Man 2 and further beyond, you have the dad issues thread that they pull through. Well, all the Marvel movies have a dad issue in it, but that dad issue they pulled through with them, you know, it was a nice touch to have that internal monologue going.
And the way that we see how that garage space becomes a central part for a lot of the pivotal moments in this movie, I'm glad they established that. And I'm glad that because I heard the song, but I didn't actually look up the lyrics. I picked up on the general angst vibe, but you kind of stating the lyrics, like I actually read them out, that makes it 100% more well-rounded out.
Yeah. And it's it has a good punk feel. Now, I will say, I remember when I watched it the first time, I remember thinking that Gwyneth Paltrow was a pretty big name for a supporting role. And I'm glad, knowing where we ended up with the MCU, I'm glad that was able to go all the way through to the end, you know, with the same actress. But yeah, I remember when it came out, I was like, man, this is a minor supporting role for such a big name.
Like you said, I mean, it's amazing how they were able to keep that through all the way through Endgame. Yeah,
and I liked her portrayal of Pepper Potts. You know, I thought, well, and I want to try to make sure I stick to Iron Man, and I especially like the development of it. But even in there, they did a good job. There's some issues I have with the movie, but overall, they did a pretty good job with their relationship and the interaction.
I mean, it all boils down to how well their chemistry is. Like, you can feel how Tony's a toddler that is constantly not paying attention to what he needs to be, and Pepper is the responsible one who is helping keep him on track when otherwise he would just go off the rails.
Right.
So kind of staying in that space about Tony's relationships with other people in this early part of the movie, another thing that I liked is the way they established Tony and Rhodey. It's hard to kind of understand, at least within this movie, how a friendship like Rhodey and Tony exists, because we see so clearly how Tony has a problem with like responsibility and showing respect to other people and just general, like I said, general responsibility. Whereas Colonel Rhodes, you know, he's uptight. He has a sense of decorum and a high sense of honor. And so it's these two polar opposites. But the thing that I think they did so well is in that scene where they are on the airplane and Tony's trying to get him to drink. He's like, no, man, I'm working. I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to drink on the job. And then it quick cuts to Rhodey drinking. And you can see in that moment that the thing that makes them work is that, you know, Tony's this loose character that needs to have some structure in his life. And Rhodey is somebody that has been really... I keep saying uptight. There's got to be a better word because uptight feels very heavy. But
yeah, I agree with you that uptight feels very heavy, but I know what you're trying to get across. And he is, well, I mean, he's in the military. He's a military.
Rigid.
Yeah,
rigid.
Right. He's, well, and I apologize. I'm not trying to characterize people in the military as rigid. But I mean, but I mean, if you think about what that life is, there's a schedule. Everything
Mhm.
is that rigid schedule. I get up at this time, I do this.
Disciplined, I guess.
That's a great word for it, disciplined.
That's the word I'm looking for.
and so you have basically one character that's disciplined and Tony Stark who's undisciplined. And so it's hard to imagine them meshing. In some ways, I feel like I wish Don Cheadle was playing this from the beginning, and I'd like to have seen his take on that character in the first Iron Man, right? But it does still come across as like Rhodey's role here is a babysitter, you know? Because like even when he comes back and says, hey, I'm working on something big, and he's like, great, I'm glad to see you're back to work. And he's like, no, I'm not talking about a weapon. And he's like, you need to go get your mind right, you know? And clearly he has, if he's in charge of weapons development, as it's stated at some point in the movie, he has, I don't want to say an agenda, but he has a reason to have that relationship with Stark. Right. And I feel like this movie emphasized that part of their relationship a little bit more than the friendship itself that you see in other films.
And I think that's because Don Cheadle and Robert Downey Jr., I think, have a better chemistry in the friendship department.
Right.
And like you said, with Terrence Howard, it's more of that babysitter role. But like the thing that I was getting to is that whenever Rhodey gets intoxicated, he's kind of like, you know, drunkenly just going on and on to Tony, the thing that he's saying, and that you kind of get a glimpse into what Rhodey actually feels, is he's kind of romanticizing this idea about how, like, man, when I put on that uniform, what I see is like other people that have my back like I have theirs. And he wants that for Tony. Like, he wants that sense of purpose that he gets from the military, and he wants to find a way to instill that into Tony because that's how much he cares for him.
Right.
And I like that you kind of see this melding of their two spectrums there.
Right. Now, I do have to say this. That scene is one of the reasons why I haven't shown this to my daughters yet. Like, that scene is difficult for me to watch now. And, you know, okay, so I did leading up to Infinity War with my students, during the lunch periods, we did an MCU marathon. Iron Man all the way through. And I remember showing this, and I'm, you know, juniors in high school, all boys school, and we're watching the scene, and I'm just, it was really uncomfortable for me. It wasn't uncomfortable for them. Actually, there was a couple of students that were just like, dude, this is wrong. But yeah, and the only reason why I bring that up is, like, when you get to Endgame and you see the full arc that he takes, it kind of narratively makes sense. But at the time when you're seeing it at the as a standalone, and I get that that's part of showing who he is as a character, it just doesn't sit as well with me.
And I think part of it has to do with, because I'd like to believe that I've grown since the first time I've seen this, because it didn't really register with me then. But I think the thing that makes it different now is that, yes, there is that logic, like, okay, we're watching a character grow, so the fact that there's this scene where he's objectifying women like this, you know, that's just part of where he's at in a negative space, and he grows to a better person. But the thing that makes it glaring is the movie's not painting it as a thing. The movie's kind of reveling in it, like, oh, look how cool this is, that, you know. Right.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect way to put it. Like, it's not a problem, it is glorifying it.
Yep. And I think that's where the problem lies. And again, it's an older movie. I think we've all collectively grown and know how to better interpret it. But yeah, I see why it's uneasy now.
Yeah. Now, one thing I do want to circle back to, like when he was in the cave, and circle back to part of that, the Stark industry that you mentioned, you know, that we kind of talked about building him up and also taking him down and kind of thing, and wrapping it up. Something that was mentioned to him was, like, when the Ten Rings guys first came in, and he asked, was it Ensign was the guy's name? Who was he in there with?
Yinsen, yeah.
Yinsen. When the group of men from the Ten Rings come in, and he asked Yinsen, who are they? His response is, they are your loyal customer, sir. You know? And that was like a really good clue that these weapons were bought and not stolen. You know, because he's like, how do they have my weapons? How do they have my weapons? That was the scene, but that might have been the line. But I love that response on his part, and kind of cluing us in of, like, no. they were legit bought.
Well, and because they even have that, I mean, they're constantly throwing it back in his face in that captivity scene, because when the leader of the Ten Rings comes in, he even throws that line at Tony, is like the most famous American mass murderer or something like that. Like they're making sure he understands that this is all at the hands of his doing.
Right. Right.
So kind of playing in the space about his relationship with Yinsen, we talked so much about the story circle in Daredevil and about how Matt's lowest point and so on. I find it so incredibly interesting that we are really dealing with Tony's lowest point at the beginning of the movie, I think. And we see so much stripped away from him at his lowest point, and he has nothing more than his own ingenuity to build the things that he needs to build, the arc reactor to save his life, and then, of course, the suit, and Jensen's moral compass to help guide him through this dark place. Also,
Jensen here, though, is very pointed, right? Because he asked, do you have family, anybody? And Starks, shakes his head no. And Jensen's line is, a man who has everything yet has nothing. And very quickly he shows how shallow Stark's life is, in terms of like the contrast of where you see him and he's in Vegas and all of this, to literally it's like, oh, we showed you with all of this stuff and now, but look at you, you really have nothing amongst all this material.
I mean, it was so much of filling the voids that he had and not addressed with vices instead of actually, having any substance.
Right. Right.
And man, it's so, I'm sure it's not gonna be the first time we use this pun. It's a very stark contrast with that conversation where Jensen, where he's like, where Tony says, why should I do anything? They're going to kill me and you if I do or don't. And if not, I'll be dead in a week anyway. And it's so interesting to me to see Tony at this point where he's still kind of like, I don't know if whining is the right word, but he's just like given up. And that, to see that all the way to Endgame where he makes the ultimate sacrifice is just, I don't know. Yeah. It's so cool they were able to pull that through.
Right. Well, and Jensen here had to show him, and tried to, like, I think that was part of it. Like Jensen says, yes, I have a family. And so he has something worth fighting for to get out. And I think that's part of what Jensen was doing, trying to give him a reason. And yet he had nothing. But then the motivation for him to escape, right, was a motivation about legacy. Mm-hmm. It was an ego appeal. So while he was set on this path to do the right thing here, I don't know if we'd say it was for a noble reason yet.
I think that's a very good way to look at it, because I'm going to peek ahead a little bit. I don't think we're quite ready to go to Act 2 yet, but one of the first notes that I have is that it's not enough to be changed. You still had to find purpose. And I think that's what a lot of the rest of this movie is dealing with, is Tony recognizes that maybe life isn't what he thought it was, but he still doesn't know what to do with this newfound sense of identity.
Right. Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think I think later in the movie we touch on that a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Okay. So two things I want to bring up. I love the reveal of the plans of his Mark I armor. However, the trailer. The trailers reveal so much, and it's so like that was a really cool reveal of the Mark I armor itself and just the plans, the way he laid it flat. I was like, flatten them out. But you've seen it in the trailer, and so that kind of diminished it a little bit. And I found it interesting, like he uses that blowtorch flamethrower, I guess, on his own to like burn the weapons they have that is his. I really, let's be honest, those weapons hold up to those flames. I mean, if not, they're pretty defective and pretty dangerous weapons to be used, because like they're in armor, like they're gonna be shot at, right? They're on planes, they're on whatever, they're gonna be shot at. Things are gonna explode. If it can't stand to that kind of heat, it's just as dangerous to those wielding them. And so
you're really dismantling the very first movie in the MCU. I wasn't expecting this. No, it makes sense though. It does, yeah. Well, I mean, it's what we've talked about before. How there's just this movie vocabulary we build where it doesn't make sense, but it keeps the movie going forward. So you just kind of like think it away.
You just let it go, yeah.
Which I have a little tangent here. as far as movie vocabulary goes, why is it in every movie when a character wakes up from like a coma or some kind of medical thing and they find out that they have the tubes in their nose that they just immediately yank it out? Like they're there for a reason. Like
I don't know.
that gross. One, it grosses me out, and two, it's like you don't know what damage you're doing.
Yeah, I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But you're right. He does that all the way to Endgame when he has the IVs and he just yanks them out.
Mm-hmm. At least he's consistent.
Yep. That's what we want in our characters, consistency. Well, no. We want growth. And
consistent growth, somewhere in the middle.
There you go. Consistent growth, the golden mean. That's what we want.
Oh, man. But, you know, and kind of circling back more on point with your talk about the trailer revealing the suit, can you imagine if we lived in a world where trailers weren't super revealing? Like, how would you feel if they reveal that first Mark I suit and you're kind of in the theater thinking like, well, that's kind of a clunky suit. And you just wonder if that's going to be it for the rest of the movie.
Well, okay. So in fairness, we talked about this a little bit in a previous podcast. In 2008, we weren't yet, at least in my knowledge, with content creators, like fine-tooth combing the trailers, frame by frame with the trailers. And the MCU wasn't a thing, and they were truly trying to get people in the theater to make this thing successful. I understand them revealing as much as they did.
So, you know, I think one of the most influential parts of this whole captivity scene in part one is the relationship with Yinsen. Specifically, I think one of the things that they did so well with the Phase 1 starter hero movies is that for Thor and Cap and Tony, they all had these characters that helped propel who they were going to be for the entirety of the saga. And Yinsen is definitely that for Tony. He teaches them about sacrifice and how that his life has to be more meaningful than what he's lived up to now. And, you know, he has that final line of like, you know, don't waste this chance that you've been given. We see how that weighs on Tony for, you know, all the way through the end.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it follows the hero's journey, right? Like your hero is sent into action. The hero is given some kind of, you know, wand, golden fleece, sword, you know, whatever it is. And the hero has to leave the mentor, you know. It's why, quick spoiler, turn down your volume for 10 seconds if you know nothing about pop culture. It's why all the mentors die. Obi-Wan, Yoda, insert your mentor here, you know, Dumbledore, any other movies that can ruin. It's why they die, because the hero has to move on. Typically, you see that later in the story, and where here they use it, you know, pretty upfront.
I just want to say, I think we may have set the world record on most movies spoiled in shortest amount of time.
Well, I said it was only going to take about 10 seconds. I hope they've turned the volume back up. Well, you know what? It's funny because I teach the hero's journey to my students. You know, I mean, they learn it in English, but I also recover it. And at the end, they're just like, I can't watch movies again, like without. It's like because it does. It impacts your viewing experience knowing it. But that's the thing, though, is like when the creator, the storyteller does it well, it doesn't matter that you know. They suck you in.
Mm-hmm. I mean, it's like seeing The Matrix. Like you see what makes it tick.
Oh, yeah. But not the second one or the third. But okay.
I meant the actual pop culture expression of like seeing The Matrix, but I guess you could also say actually seeing The Matrix too.
To reveal my feelings on the Matrix trilogy, but okay.
So, you know, I think with that, obviously the send-off with Yinsen, Tony finally escapes from the Ten Rings clutches, and he's rescued, which is going to bring us to the start of Act 2, which we've detailed is going to start with that whole press conference where he is revealing that he's going to be shutting down the weapons manufacturing part of his company. But before we get into that, one thing that I want to say as like a carryover point from the last one, because I kind of bridged these two, is like I was saying, it's so interesting to me that they had this hitting the lowest point and then having return change so early in the movie. Is that not only is it an interesting structure in a fun way to kind of like subvert the origin trope of superheroes.
Right.
I kind of wanted to step out a little bit here and say, well, first I should ask this. Have you seen the movie Chef, the other Jon Favreau movie?
Oh my gosh, I love it. The other, like, it's
Okay,
his only
I'm
one.
so
Have
glad.
you not seen? Okay, never mind. Keep going.
Well, there's the Chef TV show, and it's really good.
Well, I know, but I was about to ask, have you not seen and list a couple of movies, and then I knew the answer was going to be yes. So go ahead.
Oh, okay. I see what you mean now. Anyway, I just thought this was an interesting kind of little pointed look at Jon Favreau, where I think this is actually a style of his, because obviously we see the hero's journey, the return having changed early in this movie. I think you can almost kind of see it too in Iron Man 2, where he kind of deals with whiplash fairly early on in the movie, and the rest of the movie is kind of this weird limbo.
Yeah.
And then what I was going to say with Chef, which this is kind of just vague spoilers, nothing detailed wise, it really does feel like the character gets what they want in the middle of the movie, and for the remainder of it, there's like no conflict. And
I'd have to think about that because I don't.
Well,
only because I love the movie Chef.
Right, and that's what I was going to say. Like, I love Chef. I think Chef is a great movie, and that it succeeds without conflict in that final half of the movie. And it'd be interesting to kind of keep that in mind whenever we do get to Iron Man 2, because I do think Iron Man 2 is on the lower end of the MCU spectrums.
Yeah.
And try and see if we can figure out why it works here in Iron Man, works in Chef, but doesn't work in Iron Man 2.
Well, can I say I'm gonna go off on this tangent with you on Chef for a second because I feel like while the conflict's resolved, it's in Chef. If y'all have everybody listening, if you haven't seen Chef, go see Chef. It's so fantastic, and
which you really should, because it does kind of tie into Iron Man a little bit.
And you're gonna want to. Scarlett Johansson's in it. You're going to want to eat a grilled cheese sandwich in it. Just go see it and you'll understand, in a Cuban sandwich. Anyways, but like the conflict's resolved, but then the rest of the movie is about him rebuilding that broken relationship with his son, and so in that sense, there's story there, even though there's no conflict or it's resolved, because it's like, this is resolved, but it almost resembles life in that just because the conflict resolved, you still have to mess or deal with the broken pieces that was the conflict in the beginning in the first place. And it's about that after the conflict is resolved, the continued building up or picking up those pieces. And that's what I love about Chef.
And you kind of stating that I think it kind of mirrors a little bit of what I was feeling with Iron Man 1, is that it's not enough to be changed. It's what you do after it.
Right.
And it's,
right.
And so I think it's interesting to see how they explore that in Iron Man. And you make me want to rewatch Chef with that view set in mind.
Well, you know what? And now that you mention that, one of my notes is there's that line Obadiah has where it says, "We're ironmongers. We make weapons." And what I found interesting about that, because this is, I think Stark was asking the first time, like, did you know about this? Because I saw that they had our weapon. So this was the first time he was asking. It wasn't straight up, are we double dealing? But kind of having that innocence gone, and he's asking those questions. And there's a really interesting part of that I don't know if they fully explored, but it was definitely there, this identity of a company, especially the company of theirs. So they're making weapons, and I'm thinking like Lockheed Martin, Boeing, is it Boeing? Yeah, but definitely Lockheed Martin, where they have military contracts, right? And they do good work, and they believe in the work they're doing, but it's like, can one make a product that is harmful and sleep at night? And that's what Tony's struggling with, and then to have Obadiah's response, we're ironmongers. This is what we do. I mean, in the comic, Obadiah is Ironmonger. That's his name. I like the way they worked that in there. But like where he's clearly comfortable with it, because he's like, this is how we make our money. This is what we do, And so I liked that underlying theme, of morality, of like what I produce matters.
And Tony, even, I'm going to jump ahead a little bit because I think Tony's line is a great response to that, where it's after Tony's been working in the garage for a little bit, he comes back. Obadiah has had like the meeting with the board holders or the shareholders, and they're kind of questioning like where Tony's at, mentally. And Tony's like, I'm being responsible. That's a new direction for me, for the company. I mean me on the company's behalf.
Right.
So right there, like he's having that struggle between the identity of the company and the identity of himself, and dealing with that legacy of the company and what it means for him as a person.
Right. Well, and I like that they built the new reactor, because to me, going along with that new reactor is he's back to his old ways, right? Like he's completely slid back into, it's new tech. I've upgraded new tech. This is better. The old is trash. Just throw that out, right? And it's kind of, it's in his mind, he thinks he's turned over a new leaf, right? But he's actually just doing what he's used to, inventing new tech. But he's just kind of cloaked in this, I have this new way, at least to me at this point.
And kind of playing in that whole line of like responsibility. Like we said, Tony's on this quest for purpose, and they have that scene with Rhodey where Rhodey's talking to some new recruits, and even though Tony's not in the scene, Rhodey has that line about like, you know, the difference between a manned or unmanned pilot. Like you can't make up for intuition or human decision making and stuff like that. And I feel like that's a substitute for this branch that Tony's on about the responsibility of the power that he's creating.
Right.
And so I didn't view it this way until you pointed it out, and I really like that about how him making the second arc reactor is a feigned, I'm better now, even though he's just doing the same thing that he was doing beforehand.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So I really like that, and because he even, when he's talking to Rhodey, he even says, "I don't want this in the wrong hands. Maybe in mine it can do some good."
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah. You know, I just a quick side note. One of the things at this point, because I have it in my notes, you know, and not to stray us too far off topic, Robert Downey Jr. looks so young in this movie.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He does.
He really does. You know, and I don't think I realized how much he's aged. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but when you see it at the end game, right? The last movie, and go back and rewatch this, like it shows it's been 10 years.
Well, you know, I kind of remember when we talked about Daredevil, and specifically we were talking about how they were splitting the scenes where Ben and Karen were waiting for his editor to arrive. And it was like that idea of manufacturing context.
Right.
This is like authentic context. Like they didn't have to manufacture it. So it's like, it's cool to see how young he looks to the end in Endgame.
Oh yeah,
it's a life lived. Like it's 10 years of somebody's life.
Yeah. And then my other note, Jeff Bridges is so good when he has that line.
Oh, I know.
Tony Stark built this in a cave with the backs of scraps. Like that's my best Jeff Bridges. But like that was
a good Jeff Bridges.
Thank you. And like I just wrote down like Jeff Bridges is so good, you know, because like to me he's the dude, but here like he's totally Obadiah.
Mm-hmm. And it's so funny that you point that out, because obviously we know we're working towards this point where he has his heel turn, but there's almost a jovial sense to him that in the beginning that I think you could kind of pull from like characters he's played, like the dude.
Oh yeah.
Because I mean, even when Tony like arrives at the press conference and he has a bag of burgers from Burger King, you know, Obadiah has that throwaway line. He's like, "Oh, is one of those for me?" And it's just like, there's like that feel like a fun uncle feeling to him.
Oh yeah.
And that being said, I'm glad you kind of took this little tangent to talk about Jeff Bridges. This is just a direct note I had. Not many people can make a segue imposing, but Obadiah nails it. Any other person but Jeff Bridges would have been laughed at for rolling in on a segue.
That's a great point. That is a great point. Didn't he have a big cigar in his mouth too? Like he, yeah. That's fantastic. While we're on Jeff,
that is the embodiment of Obadiah in one image.
Oh yeah. While we're on Jeff Bridges, jot this down in your notes. Watch Arlington Road if you haven't seen it.
I have not seen it.
You gotta watch it.
Check it out.
You gotta watch it. Okay. Jeff Bridges lead. Tim Robbins is the second guy, second lead, and Joan Cusack about domestic terrorism. Fantastic.
And what's it called again?
Arlington Road. All right. Back on topic. Yeah, Jeff Bridges, you know, and this is the scene that Far From Home reached back to, right? And pulled and the guy, because the guy he yelled at about.
That's not until Act 3, though.
Oh, wait. You're right. Okay.
I thought you were just really excited to show off your Jeff Bridges impression.
Well, I two things. A, yes, I was excited about mentioning Jeff Bridges, and that distracted me. So, yeah. Yeah, you're right. I got caught up. I totally lost myself because I got caught up in Jeff Bridges.
He has that effect on people.
Yeah, he does.
Side note on a side note, I know we're already getting carried away because we're about an hour into this, but Jeff Bridges has an entire album dedicated to like helping you sleep, and it's got like weird talking pieces and music pieces, and if you've never listened to it, you should check it out because it's wild.
Oh, I'm in because
it should be on Spotify. It's just I think the title is evocative for probably search reasons, but it's called Sleeping with Jeff Bridges.
Okay, so because every night before I go to bed, I'll listen to a little bit of ASMR. And so, yeah, I'm in.
Check it out. Okay. So hopping back into Iron Man, I do want to say another thing that I found interesting in this second act is that it's really interesting that on this quest for purpose, we see that Tony reaches out to 3 different people. Obviously, Obadiah in the scene we were talking about, him revealing his arc reactor and them having their exchange, we're warmongers. Then you have him reaching out to Rhodes where he was like, hey, I want you to come see what I'm working on. But Rhodes is like, nah, I think you quoted it. You need to get your head right.
Yeah, I mentioned that earlier. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And then finally, he reaches out to Pepper as well, which she does help him, but she's super reluctant about when she's replacing the internal arc reactor for him. It shows Tony's resolve at this point in his life where even though the people that he's closest with are all kind of like, you're not right here, he's still kind of moving forward with trying to find his new identity.
Yeah, so I wrote this down in quotes. It said the "get your mind right" line, and then I put "interesting friendship" because Tony is in a place where he's trying to improve himself, and Rhodey is like, no, you need to get back to work. And I've put "interesting friendship" because there's an element of friendship where, yeah, one friend pulls the other one through when they're in a funk or something like that, like that's what friends are for. But ideally, friends are pushing you both towards virtue and becoming better. Right. And so it's interesting that like Stark is trying to go this virtuous path, so to speak, and Rhodey is pushing him. He's almost like one of those in the hero's journey. He becomes in a minor moment here, one of those obstacles, one of those, the people that he has to, henchmen, so to speak, that he has to overcome in order to reach his end goal. And who are the other 2 you mentioned?
Obadiah.
Obadiah, okay.
And then Pepper.
And Pepper,
a little less so. I think they established some friction with her being unwilling to help with the changing of the arc reactor. And I think that's just setting the stage for later on.
Right.
Actually, at the end of this act, at the beginning of the next act, where she catches him taking off his his armor.
Well, and you need that. And it's interesting because you need that moment where, and it comes together in the end, but you need that moment. She needs the old arc reactor to have as the gift, right? Proof that Tony Stark has a heart, And the reason why I bring that up is because if you think about it, to save the day. So I already mentioned, right, like and I know I'm getting ahead of myself here, but I mentioned how, he has this facade of a new path, but he's really doing what he always did with the new arc reactor. And so it makes sense that you have this scene where she keeps it and attaches it to Tony Stark has a heart. And then in order to save the day and to truly become new, he has to have that original one, right, that he made that was part of his change of heart, right? Because the one that he had that's made under this false pretenses, maybe that facade, is the one Ironmonger used, right? And so that new one kind of still represents the old ways. And so, of course, it's taken by the villain and supposed to be used. And he has to go back and get his heart, the original, to overcome that.
Oh, that's so good. You make me... That's what I love about the MCU, is that you can watch it so many times and still find new ways to love it.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, that's so good. So another thing that I was kind of coming to... I don't even know if I've finally figured out where I've landed, but within my notes, I'm kind of toying with this idea of like internal versus external conflict, kind of talking about how like the story structure gets resolved early on in the beginning of the film. The thing that I really liked was that first flight scene, which was just absolutely amazing when Tony's like testing out the suit.
Oh, yeah.
But what's cool to me is that it really highlights how a large portion of this movie is kind of absent of external like conflict in a tradition of like a superhero film, like where you're going out and fighting bad guys.
Right.
It's more of a man overcoming that internal one. And so to finally see him have that flight scene where it's just pure joy felt so earned and rewarding from a viewing experience.
Well, you know what I find interesting is, this just popped in my head, so it's not fully formulated. We're gonna jump back to Christopher Nolan for a moment. We brought
It's a
him up.
staple in this place.
Yeah, but I want to look at Batman Begins for a second because Batman Begins has a very, I'm going to be careful here, but a similar structure in the origin of Batman being born and his training, right? In the terms of like the conflict is that internal becoming something, and I'm just wondering if and I'd want to see them almost quite literally side by side. I'd love to think about it that way and see, as a story structure, what did Nolan do here versus Favreau, and why do both work? But they also feel very different.
I'm going to put us on accountability here. As much as we talked about it, we have to have a bonus episode where we go through a Nolan Batman movie.
We do.
Like, we just have to.
We do.
And I think it helps that the Nolan Batman movies were so influential for all superhero movies.
Right.
So I don't think it's too far of a deviation, but we should find a way to do that at some point.
Okay, so on the count of three, which movie? 1, 2, 3.
Batman
Begins. There you go. Okay.
Yeah. Don't get me wrong. I love The Dark Knight and I like
Yeah.
it better. But as far as what we're dealing with, I think Batman Begins is the best place to start with.
Awesome. I knew there's a reason we partnered up for a podcast. So yeah.
Oh man. But kind of staying within the scene of like Tony flying for the first time. We see, I'm peeking ahead again, obviously, in Iron Man 3, we see that Tony deals with this idea of, am I more than the suits? And it's something that I thought really didn't come to fruition, at least in my own recognition of it, until, Iron Man 3. But we see it here. Like, his ingenuity is on full display. Because when he has that flight scene, his ego gets the better of him and he's flying up to see how high he can go, and his suit freezes and he loses, obviously, his mobility. He loses Jarvis, and he relies on his ingenuity of releasing the flares to kind of jump his suit back into action and save his own self.
Right.
And it's really cool how much that theme keeps popping back up for Tony.
Right. Well, he's very resourceful. Even for being in the suit, and I think it was a YouTube video that I watched, and I'll send it to you at some point when you're ready for it. Sorry,
it's a little pointed.
I kid because I love. No, but it traced like all the things that how it traced how stuff happens to Stark. And then with each, and it's not just like this weird, like, thought experiment. Like, he actually points to events in the movie and then shows the next time you see another suit that, like, oh, I'm going to add this to my suit, right? I'm going to add this to my suit. And he's constantly, and so, like, you see that even in his, like, in there, the ingenuity of, like, I got to do this, I got to do that. And you mentioned Iron Man 3 kind of focuses on that, right? Him being a tinkerer, I think was the word they used. But you can trace it in his suits, right? Like, even in this movie, the icing problem, and then later in the end, it comes up, right? And that's kind of a very much a character trait on Stark's part of, like, I'm always looking to improve. But it's nice because to me, this movie and the story is about realizing that the self-improvement, rather than that internal self-improvement rather than the external improvement.
And kind of playing in that space with the suit being built around experiences. Another scene that I really liked is there was this shot where Tony was watching the news. I believe it was right after the flight sequence, and he's learning about this fundraising event that's happening without him. And when he is watching that, he holds the mask up to him, and we see the news through the eyes of the Iron Man suit.
Right.
And so, I'm not making a huge leap here, but obviously that first press conference, he was very vulnerable. Then we see him reach out to 3 different people in his life and kind of have mixed results. And so clearly he's kind of, in a very vulnerable place. He's had doubts casted around him. But him viewing that little news piece through the mask is him taking matters into his own hands after everyone else has faltered around him.
Right.
And the fact that that's happening in his garage, where we've already established that it's a safe space, and in this moment, Jarvis is building, I believe it's the Mark IV at this point.
Let's see. The Mark IV is the first one that we see in red and gold. Because
Right.
one is in the cave, 2. No, it's the Mark III. Because 2 is the silver one, and Mark III
And so then
is the first
Mark
red and gold.
III.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, and that's what I was getting at. So we're seeing this all happening at once. Jarvis is building the suit, and right before he leaves, he tells Jarvis to throw a little hot rod red on it. So you have the suit that he's built in his own ingenuity. You have that influence of his father's legacy with the hot rod that it represents, and he's going out into the world as this new person. And I just really like this scene.
Yeah. Oh, I loved the building scene. I love the way he learned to fly, like, and not the flying scene, but it was like, yeah, I could fly. You know, like that, him shooting the arc reactor, or not the arc reactor, the pulse reactor. Yeah, like I loved all of that sequence. Because you can see the thought and the care, and you know, it wasn't like he just put it together. They really took the time to show it's like he's working on the mechanics of the calf of the suit. You know, he's tightening the elbow and putting the arm in there and really, you know, it's a real craft to Stark.
Yeah. And there's I've used this in Daredevil, but there's a tactile feel to it doing it that way.
Right.
Like I miss how heavy those suits used to feel.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, if you think about it, like the first suit up where he steps and it's all in pieces and they're putting it on and you see him actually drilling it together, you know, to tighten it and stuff. Like I don't know, you get that, like you said, that heaviness and that feel of what it is compared to, like, let's go all the way to, you know, Infinity War and Endgame. And it's really cool and sleek, that nanotech, right? But man, you don't really get the sense of the bulk of the suit the way you do in that first one. I don't think in any of them. Maybe in number 2 as well. I'd have to go back and see some of those suit up scenes.
Because I remember the briefcase scene. Like, it still had that heavy feel to it in 2.
Yeah. Now, I do want to mention here, because I have it in the note, and so I want to bring it up. That scene where he leaves, or he's watching, and you said that news report where he's looking through his the mask, and he goes, and he's dressed up, and Pepper's dressed up. It's the dress that he bought her, but she actually bought it for her birthday. That's another scene where I'm not sure that interaction holds up or just plays very different now.
Yeah.
You know, and I mean, and that was the other thing about that one time I did it with the student marathon, is them watching it and them just kind of not having any issue with it and accepting it as normal. Cause I'm like, man, the power structure there, that's your boss. The line, you want to dance. She's like, oh no. And he's like, great, come on. And takes her, you know, and he's like, look great, smell great. And then he's like, but I could fire you if that would make it better. And it's like, whoa, all of this stuff. And I get, again, character wise, what they're showing. I get like his out of touchness of, be honest, reality to a degree, you know, and it just, you know, and they actually, you know, she explains to her, you know, Potts explains why it's a problem. You know, I'm in this backless dress, you're my boss, and what, you know, and there, but it just doesn't, I don't know. It doesn't play right to me as much as, and honestly, I'm calling myself out because it's one of those things I remember when I first saw it, I didn't think anything of the scene. So like, I'm totally calling myself out on this one as to when I watch it now.
Oh, I'm totally in that same camp with you. And I'll be completely honest, I didn't even pick up on it because you and I both did rewatches. I did a rewatch with my stream community. You did a rewatch with your class. And I watched Iron Man before we had the conversation. I didn't even pick up on it then, which I'm really ashamed about. And now that you've kind of like opened up my eyes to it, and I'm fully willing to kind of like get called out on this if this is the wrong thing. I think what happens is that because this is a written thing, it's easy to kind of get caught into like, well, this is how it's supposed to be because we know how these characters are going to end up. But if you step back into what the reality of like, this is a real world, like you said, that power structure is incredibly inappropriate. And why I think it still feels wrong is in the same way that it felt wrong in the beginning of the scene with the airplane and all the stewardesses are dancing, is it's not used to show a negative side of Tony. It's used to glorify, look how suave he is.
Yes.
And so it's the character, like you can make the character make those mistakes but the movie has to know which side is right, if that makes sense.
It does.
And I don't think the movie knew the right side of that either.
No.
And so that's what doesn't sit right with us now.
Right. And I think you hit the nail on the head.
So, and I mean, that's just time and growth. I mean, I don't want to just say like forgive it and like, oh, it was a different time. But being able to like look past that is, I think, growth on hopefully collective society.
Right. Now to jump back in the movie, I do have a note. This movie has including credits, an end scene. I noticed it had.
I missed it.
I had it. Oh, you missed the end scene? 2 hours and 6 minute runtime, where it was around the 1 hour, 15-minute mark that we actually see the reveal of the Mark III. And I bring that up because I found it interesting of how far into it that you finally get the Mark III, whereas like, go back to Nolan's Batman Begins. You get the reveal of Bale as Batman in the suit and him saying the line, "I'm Batman." Sorry, a second. Hold on.
I thought you were gearing up for your Batman impression.
No, I was. Trust me, I'm not gonna try that one. But Batman impression. I'm Batman. Nope, there it is, and it was terrible. We'll edit maybe that out. You're editing this week, but no. So like at almost the exact halfway point of the movie is when Bale gives that line, "I'm Batman," and we finally get to see the suit and reveal. And so when I talk about that pace, it's similar in origin story, right? And you get that pacing, but you get it halfway through the movie, and it didn't feel rushed or anything. Whereas this, you don't get the Iron Man suit till about an hour and 15 minutes in of a 2 hour 6 movie, and that includes credits. So in that context, you don't get a lot of him in the Mark III suit. Which I don't think I noticed before until this rewatch.
Yeah. I want to be careful here because I don't want to keep poking ahead, but I remember one of the things that was criticized about Iron Man 3 a lot is how, this is an Iron Man film without Iron Man because Tony spends so much time out of the suit. It doesn't feel that much different in this one where he doesn't spend as much time in the suit either.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point.
So I want to say that now to keep that in the back of our minds whenever we do get to Iron Man 3.
Yeah. So at this point, what are your thoughts on that whole sequence when he goes back and fights in the suit in Gulmira?
So something that I think will be fun to track is the moment I believe that these heroes become kind of their title. Even if they don't say it like Tony does. So, for example, we talked about with Daredevil how Matt reveals the story about the abusive father. That was like the catalyst for him going out to start fighting crime. With Iron Man, I like the way that they handle it here because the catalyst for him becoming the hero is fixing the wrong that he helped create, which is this whole scene in Gulmira. And it's such a large-scale metaphor to handle the small-scale conflict that he's having with Obadiah. And I think that's at the heart of what makes a good superhero film, is grounding the large-scale moments with the smaller-scale stakes. So this whole Gulmira scene is the embodiment of that, and I was pretty pumped about it.
I think that's a good way to put it. Because, I mean, he goes back, and he's not fighting like a huge villain, right? And you're starting to get your first clue, because we mentioned, let's put it this way. From a comic book knowledge standpoint, you should know Obadiah Stane is the villain. From a movie vocabulary standpoint, you should know he's the villain because you don't hire Jeff Bridges to be a supporting actor, right? But up until this point, if you don't think of it in the movie vocabulary, or you don't know Obadiah Stane's the Ironmonger, or you didn't watch the trailer, like 10 Rings, especially with the very limited, well, not limited, but with some comic book knowledge, the 10 Rings, the Mandarin is the leader of the 10 Rings, and that's a classic Iron Man villain. So it makes sense that like that's a villain, and like he goes back there, and that's what he's taking on as well, And so it's, while it's minor, it also has this weird feel like it's not. If that makes sense. Because at this point, let's put it this way, because at this point, I don't know if it's clear of who the big bad is for this movie.
I will say this to go out on this limb, especially because of the way like you detailed it as if you have comic book knowledge or you have if you have movie vocabulary knowledge, that you should know that Obadiah is the villain. I didn't. Even at this point, I remember my first watch. Like I remember being fully shocked whenever Jeff Bridges is revealed as the villain. So I mean, I could be your test subject here in saying that I didn't know.
Well, good. But
that's just who I am as a person.
Well, I mean, it's that, but it's also like, I mean, as storytellers, it's their job to make you forget that movie vocabulary, right? Like it's their job to get you sucked in to where you forget about those things because you're engrossed in the story. And I think they did that. Lastly about this, not lastly, second to lastly, then lastly, penultimate, then ultimate, maybe. I liked how they showed off the suit, right? Like he gets shot by the tank. He punches through the wall. He's doing the pulse reactor. He's has little things that comes out of his shoulders and targets. Like they really show off the suit, right? So I liked that sequence. But then, like, a quick side note, I've been really into Dungeons and Dragons a lot lately, and so I need to say that for some context for my note. That tank rolled a nat 20. Like for that tank to hit Iron Man while he's flying, like that's a nat 20. But like he has such a small cross section to aim. He's a moving target. It's a tank, right? Like for you to knock him out of the sky.
It's a damn good shot.
Yeah.
Kind of staying within this space. Actually, no, because you said you had another. That was your penultimate note. Did you have something?
No, the nat 20. The nat 20. I was
okay. I love it.
Yeah, the nat 20 was my ultimate. Sorry. Now it seems kind of a letdown. I built it up too much.
No, it was a good note. I just wanted to make sure I wasn't stepping on him. But what I was going to say is that, we've praised Marvel for handling collateral damage in movies like Civil War. But honestly, they've been dealing with real world consequences from the beginning. The way that he took the time when you had those pinpointing missiles, it was this, you see Iron Man kicking ass and, doing this and that. And then he really slows down and pauses. Not that any other superhero would show, just killing civilians like that. But I like that they had that pause and showed the capability of Iron Man to be able to pinpoint accurate,
right.
Who he was taking out.
Yeah, and you're right. And they've... Well, I like that jumping ahead movie-wise to Civil War, that self-criticism, But you're right, like even here, that wanting to do right, like, is what kicks him off to have this change of ways, And so from the beginning, you could argue that they've been mindful of it.
And because you have that scene with the pinpoint missiles, and then you have the scene where he is evading the jets and he crashes through one of the wings.
They hit him.
And
they hit him.
That's true. They did. They make a big scene about him rescuing that pilot. And then so it's something that they've definitely been conscientious of from the beginning.
Oh, yeah. Can I do a quick side note? Everybody has wanted to see stealth armor, right? Like, I say everybody, maybe hyperbole, but wanted to see stealth armor. My understanding of stealth armor or stealth technology, I don't feel like I'm revealing state secrets because I know very little of stealth technology. But
That's what somebody who knew a lot would say.
Yeah. Shh. So, but like my understanding of it is part of it is in the design minimizing the cross section, right? Like, and they even mentioned that scene has a small cross section for the radar. So the way radar works is, you send out a signal, it bounces back, and then you use it like that, like bats. Anyway, sorry, I had to throw that reference out there as well. But because it's a human flying in the air, that's a pretty small cross section. Like, wouldn't he pretty much be stealth by nature? Like, you wouldn't really have to do something fancy, I would assume.
Yeah, that's a good point. And like you said, I mean, it's illustrated with how lucky of a shot that tank had.
Yeah. Nat 20, baby. Nat 20. I want to play Dungeons and Dragons. Okay, keep going.
I do too. I feel like we're kind of gearing up to transition to Act 3, but before we get there, I don't think we could leave Act 2 without saying we get our very first Stan Lee cameo in this act.
We do.
And it's as Hugh Hefner.
That well, and it's funny because it's fitting when you throw in like his cameo from Deadpool, as basically the DJ at the strip club, but yeah, it was a fantastic. I hate that we're gonna be done with Stan Lee cameos.
Yeah, it's amazing how they've been able to build up all these cameos in a way that's fun and doesn't break the reality somehow.
Right.
Like you somehow, I can only speak for me. I forget it's coming every time and get delighted every time I see it.
I'm with you. Like I know it's coming, but yeah, like every time it's every time.
It'll be sad moving forward. But like I said, I think we are moving into Act 3 now. So as we said, this is where Tony gets back from that mission in Gulmera, where he is discovered by Pepper taking off the armor, and this is going to take us all the way through the end of the movie. So yeah, I think the first thing that I want to bring up, because this kind of pairs with the last scene of, outrunning the jets. We see incredibly early on that the MCU is just not interested in the old trope of superheroes keeping their identity secret.
Right.
It's obviously evident because of the way the movie ends with the I am Iron Man, but you can see it here early on in the scene with the jet sequence and then with Pepper catching Tony taking off the suit. It's almost like they're conceding hey, we're going to let you have the power fantasy of these heroes, but you're going to deal with the real world consequences of how disruptive having a force like that would be in the world. And like I said, with the jets, we have that scene in the war room where they're like calling, different branches of the military, just trying to figure out who exactly was in an active war zone.
Right.
And then again, when, as soon as Pepper finds Tony, she immediately begins questioning about the bullet holes in his armor and clearly very concerned about him.
Okay. My notes on that scene, and it kind of steps back outside of the movie a little bit. This is years later, and it still looked great. Like the visuals of what the suit looked like, the mechanics of the machinery to take it off. Like it still to me looked real. It still looked great. And sometimes you see the further away you get and new technology, improves. Or new technology comes out and technology improves, and you're like, oh, that didn't hold up as well. To me, this still really looks good.
Especially because we see a lot of characters in suits with face being revealed. That feels so much more natural than some of the take Bruce Banner being revealed in the Hulkbuster suits in Infinity War. And it's just it is a testament to how great it looks that they still hold up in these rewatches.
Right. Well, and you mentioned not only well, we're going to have these real, easy for me to say, we're going to have these real, oh my gosh. You mentioned we're going to have these real world consequences about the identity, but it's not often you see them, you see the superheroes as kind of the classic, we're going to get suited up. You don't see them taking off the suit often. And so I also liked that element of it's complicated and difficult getting, it looked really cool and fancy putting the suit on, and now it's not as smooth trying to get it off, and I really liked. I thought that was a nice touch.
Yeah, you brought up this notion of the vocabulary of superhero media evolving. I say media because we've been covering TV shows and movies, but those two, media and TV shows, is evolving, and we're seeing that here take place. Oh
yeah, well, because you can figure this is 2008. When you think about superhero movies that came out before this, you had at least
Dark
two
Knight.
of the three Spider-Mans, right?
Yeah.
You had Batman Begins in 2005.
No, I think it was all three Spider-Mans.
It was all three Spider-Mans. Okay. So all three Spider-Man had been out. All three X-Men have been out. The Brandon Ruth, Bryan Singer directed Superman.
The Hulk.
Yeah, Hulk, the Eric Bana Hulk. God, what was the one?
Fantastic Four.
Fantastic Four. So you've seen, not the second one, but at least the first one. So there's a number of superhero movies that had been out. And I mean, when you look at those ones we mentioned, it wasn't like they weren't successful. I mean, yes, Nolan changed the game. You could argue the X-Men movies, especially the first and second one, kind of changed the game. The first Spider-Man and the second Spider-Man, which was probably better than the first one, were all game changers in their own way. But you're right. There's elements of Iron Man in what they did in the MCU with the identities and all this stuff that really took that genre and made more changes to it.
So, I mentioned how this is the scene where Pepper comes in and is catching Tony taking off the suit. There's a little moment here that I think is one of my favorite exchanges between them is as she is protesting going to the office to gather the information that he needs, she outright declines him, and Tony responds with, you stood by me when my company was making money off all these weapons. I wrote down this specific quote, "I know in my heart that it's right," which is in reference to him wanting to do this. And when he references his heart, that's the moment that Pepper buys in. I like that they did that because clearly she made that proof that Tony Stark has a heart gift as a subtle jab, but there's truth in jest. And then her hearing that Tony is sincerely speaking from his heart shows how much it means to him, and in turn, how much it means to her that he cares about this.
Oh, yeah. Well, and it ties back to, I agree with you. It ties back to what I was, I think that arc reactor, like I know, it's comic book accurate to put it in his chest, but I really like how they played into that. Like he starts in the cave and he begins that change of heart, and he gets a new one, so to speak, but he still has that I'm not satisfied, so he tries to upgrade. And it's that whole at that point it starts to become like you didn't realize what you had when it was right in front of you, kind of thing, and so I upgraded it, and then I have to go back and realize it's not all this other fancier stuff. I had it all along.
You referenced the early scenes again with Tony being in the cave. I kind of wanted to this isn't exactly the same, but it's adjacent. They always talk about how the best villains are the villains that think they're right. Like they know, like Thanos thought he was doing good by snapping half the universe away because that's his way of solving a problem.
You mean he wasn't?
Sorry. I'm learning so much tonight.
No, I'm just kidding. Oh, damn. No, I'm just kidding.
No, you're totally fine. But it's fun to see in a very similar vein that Obadiah misdiagnoses Tony's hero journey by saying he left a part of himself in that cave and never really came back. And yes, he did shed some of the vices, but it's funny to see how Obadiah is just writing him off as having never really returned, even though he has returned,
right,
having changed.
Yeah. No, that's a good point where Obadiah completely misses it. But can I mention two right here where I feel like there's two plot holes?
Okay.
Or
you've already disrupted all the other plot holes.
Okay. Well, it just doesn't. Well, true plot holes. Like the other, were those you need to get that it's a movie. I never fully understood because it has that line I was afraid that I was going to kill the golden goose, but you left one last egg. And I understand when Stark comes back and says we're going to shut down the weapons, and he does an injunction, right? Because he wants to get making weapons again, making money. I never understood though why. I guess it's the jealousy, but outside of that, I never fully understood why he wanted to Stark dead. Mm-hmm. So that was one. The other one was I'm with you, and I like the scene and everything you said about between Pepper Potts and his heart, but I didn't understand necessarily outside of building tension, I guess, the need to send Pepper Potts, story-wise as a creator and writing the script, outside of building tension. I never understood necessarily why that scene where you got to send Pepper to copy the files. Because in my head, I'm like, you're Stark, who we later know you hacked the Pentagon in high school. You know what I mean? Did you really need to send Pepper with a thumb drive to copy stuff? And so those two that the reasoning in there, those two never quite. Well, I mean, I forgive it, and I like the movie, and it's debatably top 5, top 6 MCU for me, right? Because if it wasn't for this, we don't have a podcast. But in terms of like how a story functions and the mechanics and all that kind of stuff of a story, those two things never really quite gelled for me.
You know, I'm totally with you that yes, it's plot reasons they want to create that tension, but that's only so satisfying. Like when you start to poke around at it, it doesn't feel right. The only thing that comes to mind as maybe a possible explanation is, yes, you're right. You know, Tony hacked the Pentagon. If it could be one of those situations and where his own security is so good he can't hack into it, but that doesn't feel right either, because it's like he's trying to get into his own stuff from the outside, which you would imagine would be impenetrable, right?
Right.
So that's the only, like, I'm trying to meet them somewhere halfway, but I don't think that's right either.
Yeah, no, I understand that. And I get that, and it's not unforgivable, it's not terrible or whatever, but it's just, and I don't even think I had that feeling the first watch, like in the theater. But it's just one of those things where I don't know about this.
It's unsatisfying.
Yes.
You know, we kind of were talking about this scene where Obadiah says that he thought he killed the golden goose. Another line that he has in that scene that I really liked was, "You think just because you have an idea, it belongs to you." And, you know, I already touched on this.
That's called intellectual property. There's a whole branch of law about it. Okay.
Well, I guess that's why he's a villain.
Copyright. Okay.
But, you know, something that I'm learning through this rewatch, like I said before, is that I used to think Tony's identity crisis was cemented in Iron Man 3, stemming from that conversation with Cap and Avengers. You know, we see Tony is so often stripped of the things that he builds, which causes him to constantly have to use his own resources to save himself.
Right.
And so when Obadiah takes away his arc reactor, it's hammering in this point that Tony is constantly straddling this line between the thing that he draws power from also invites others to use that same tech for the wrong reasons. And it's like Vision said, power invites challenge. So I like that early on we're seeing Tony having to wrestle with this idea of, is this power best used in my hands, which is something we see him directly tell Rhodey early on in part 2.
Oh, yeah. Well, and I mean, if you permit me, I can pull that thread all the way to Endgame, right? Because he recognizes...
I'll allow it.
Thank you. He recognizes, right, like with the time travel, I solved it, but you know what? I can put a pin in it right here. We can be done, you know, or like even before that, where he's like, I don't want to risk what I have now, which kind of has a weird implication. Think of, I could do this actually, but I'm not willing to go down that road, because history shows every time I do, it doesn't always end well. You know, I mean, not that they're always happy endings, but because you see that, but there's always that risk.
Yeah, that's a fascinating way to pull it all the way through. I like that.
Yeah. Now I'm gonna jump outside and critique it a little bit more here. Was Obadiah like just hiding behind the couch? Because they had a wide shot on him walking in that very open living room, and he sits and answers the phone, and all of a sudden, like you get the audio cue from the previous scene, so you know what it is. But like Obadiah had to be, and as much as I love Jeff Bridges, like he doesn't appear super athletic to like, it's easy for him to get off the floor like very quickly and silently from behind the couch either.
I'll say this. If there's any person that's going to pull off being menacing behind a couch, it is Jeff Bridges. We need a side one shot of Jeff Bridges and Wesley in their master plan while Ben Urich tracks them down. That's the show I want. Or another one shot would be Obadiah just crouched behind the couch and just like having all these false starts of thinking Tony was there and just like, oh god dang it, and just going waiting. Back to waiting. Oh man. But you know, But talking about the whole Tony wrestling with the idea of his power best used in my hands, I'm skipping ahead a little bit to where Tony ultimately defeats Obadiah in the air because of the icing problem, like we said. And it really highlights that the power is best in the hands of those who understand it. Tony had experience with the icing problem because he used the power firsthand. He tested it and learned from it.
Right.
Whereas Obadiah just took what didn't belong to him and didn't realize the extent of what he was doing. So,
well, and within the context of the movie, that was his first time wearing it. Like he just taken the arc reactor from Tony, put it in, and just went for it.
Yeah. So I like how they're illustrating that power responsibility dichotomy between them two.
I don't want to slip into this critique of the movie, so I'm going to critique the trailer.
Okay.
I feel like the Ironmonger suit had a better reveal than the Iron Man suits because of the trailers.
I can see that. Because it was that like through the chains kind of like intimidating.
Yeah, and the eyes lit up first, and then they come out, and he comes out moving and running, and pretty agile for that size. Whereas you saw the Mark I, you saw the Mark II. Not only see the Mark III, like you see the Mark III where the scene where he gets shot down by the tank, and he dodges the next one by the tank, and then shoots it with the missile and walks away before it blows up. You get all that in the trailer.
Yeah.
And so like I feel like the reveal of the Ironmonger suit was a lot cooler.
Yeah, that's a good point. I forgot that they showed so much of that until just now versus what they show of Obadiah or Ironmonger.
Okay. So, and one last thing, we'll get back to the movie. My note, I put a big ha 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 next to this note because my R in Stark look like an N, so my note actually says, "Why did he order the hit on Stank?"
Do you work for FedEx?
No, but I used to work for UPS. So,
oh man. So, stepping back into the movie, one last thing I want to talk about of this whole Tony and Warmonger dichotomy is so much of Tony's journey has been realizing how he's living a life of excess. Once again, they really highlight his growth by showing how Ironmonger is so much more incredibly excessive with all the bulk and the weapons that he has. And because even Obadiah says, it's like, my suit is not as conservative as yours. And so it shows how Tony has really thrived because he's streamlined the things that are important to him in his life.
Well, I mean, what I love about what you just mentioned with the streamlinedness, is that a word? Of his suit. In the final fight, well, we already mentioned, like, he really showed off what his suit can do in Gomera. In the final fight, like, if I remember right, he uses the chest piece as a weapon once. In the arc reactor, I mean, in his the hand cannons, why am I blanking on them right now?
The pulse reactors? Yeah,
the pulse reactors. He only uses those in this fight. Mm-hmm. And part of it is that, and I really like that they did this, like he's using his old reactor, and they established very on, like, he doesn't have a lot of power left, right? So they're creating tension by constantly reminding us, you don't have a lot of power, the power is draining. And so he's at a disadvantage. And I remember specifically mentioning this in our last episode review of Daredevil, and how that last fight with Kingpin just felt like a fight because all that tension was spent and there was no real tension felt there. And so that was one thing I really loved about this, how they found a way to continue to build tension in this last fight through him losing power.
And the way that they were kind of reallocating that power within the fight scene is really cool too, and added such a grounded layer to his suit. Yeah.
Well, and then I had two notes here that I'm gonna give you both. Okay. And then then hear what you have to say, because I don't think that when they did it, I don't think that when they did it, they had far-reaching MCU in mind, right? And I'm not sure to what extent they reached back and to this moment making the movies.
Mhm.
Okay. So the first one was Ant-Man used this move, where he jumps on the back and Iron Man's, this looks important, and he yanks, right? And thinking like Civil War when Ant-Man's like pulling stuff on Iron Man's armor. And then Ironmonger's line, ironic, you tried to rid the world of weapons and gave it its greatest one yet.
Mhm.
Right. And I got two things out of that line. One was that whole notion, okay, we become what we hate. Kind of thing that you see for some people in real life and in movies. But two, he did make the weapon that undid the snap, right? So like he, in trying to rid the world of weapons, he did. I mean, so it's an interesting spin, right? And trying to rid the world of weapons, and you made its greatest one yet, and like it was his tech that had those gauntlets that undid the snap, that got rid of Thanos and stuff. And so I don't know if they were intentionally going that far back to that line and inspiring that, but in my head now, watching it, putting all those together, I'm definitely linking that together.
Yeah, I mean, because what better demonstration of his growth and wrestling with the idea of like, is power better? Am I capable of being in control of the power without letting it corrupt me? And I mean, we see with him being able to wield the Infinity Stones for the good of the universe. I mean, that's such a good pull from beginning to end.
Right.
And like you said, I definitely they didn't have the larger scale MCU in mind, but it's fun to try and believe that's what inspired the whole formation of it being Tony Tech to build the Iron Gauntlet.
Yeah.
So really, honestly, in this part 3, I don't have anything to say that hasn't been already said about the I Am Iron Man scene. I mean, it's iconic, I think. And everybody knows about this scene because we literally see Tony throw the cards away and fully come out and shatter the norm of superhero identities and really shake up what was going to be the norm moving forward for the MCU.
Mm-hmm. Well, and there was a small moment where he's kind of, I don't say backslid, but like he's talking to Pepper and he's like, you ever think about that night? And it's the night that we just discussed, like had some problems with. And she's, oh, you night we danced and this and there. And then the night you left me. And he's like, that'll be all the spots, and I actually liked that moment. I liked the wrapping up, and forgive me, the first time we mentioned Coulson in this whole podcast review, but wrapping up the Coulson storyline, that was in this movie, and that it was just a really nice way to wrap up in a very Tony Stark kind of way, especially at this point, but yet really start pointing to bigger things.
I think the reason that it becomes iconic is not only because it is the perfect culmination of everything that Tony's been going on in this journey. Like you said, it hints towards a larger future of the MCU, not only within the narrative, but the meta of the superhero landscape.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and it's very Tony. Like you would expect, well, most superheroes, that genre, whatever it is, well, not whatever it is on the genre, whatever film or show it is, that genre relies on that secret identity, and this is just truly just flying in the face of that.
Great way to differentiate itself.
Yeah, and at that point, like when you first get it, like it's a cool line, but it's also kind of jarring, kind of shocking, because it's not something like you should expect it because it's Tony Stark, but movie vocabulary, it's not something you're expecting. Well, another way to put it is, and I'm stealing this line from another podcast about another movie, but it's that whole thing, but you really don't want to know kind of thing. Like in the back of your mind, he's about to say that because it's what you've just watched, but you just don't want to believe it.
It's a fun way to put it.
It was a podcast you're talking about Nolan movies.
It always comes back to Nolan.
Let's be honest. We got to get Christopher Nolan to do one MCU movie. I would love to see his take.
I'm so egotistical. I thought you were like, we got to get Christopher Nolan to come do one MCU Need to Know episode.
Hey, I'm down. If you can make that happen.
You hear to hear first. We're gonna get Christopher Nolan on MCU Need to Know at some point. That's how we'll know we made it. Remember when we said we needed to have like some sort of milestone to throw glasses and say have another? That's it right there.
That's it.
When we get Christopher Nolan on the podcast. Oh man. So we're drawing to an end here with part 3, but of course we cannot end this podcast without having a conversation about the very first in-tag in the MCU, which of course is Nick Fury showing up to talk to Tony about the Avengers Initiative.
Okay, I'm going to step outside that real quick.
Uh-huh.
I'm really impressed because it wasn't until after Endgame where an alternate take of that came out, where they clearly referred to Spider-Man and like mutants that they didn't use and couldn't use, but it just goes to show Kevin Feige and his vision of what he wanted, that, because we mentioned we don't think they had the larger picture in mind in terms of like what we ended up with, but clearly Kevin Feige had something in mind to be able to say like, I'm getting Nick Fury, I'm getting Samuel L. Jackson. Even before, like at that point, I think he had a 10-picture movie deal, which is practically unheard of. Most are like 2 to 3 movie deals, and so in that, I mean, yeah, some movies in the past had end tags. Ferris Bueller had an end tag, the end credit scene, but this was on another level, and this is what really set the expectations that movies will have end tags.
Yeah, I mean, because I think before this, like, I don't think in-tag was part of the pop culture vocabulary until after Marvel movies.
Yeah.
We know they're not the first ones to do it, but the fact that my parents or my sister were asking, oh, do we need to stay till after the credits?
Right.
Started because of this film.
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. So I remember staying all the way to the end of the credits on The Phantom Menace. I know your feelings on that, but I remember staying all the way to the end of The Phantom Menace, and you had the Darth Vader. You had the Darth Vader deep breathing at the end of that, right? And even just that was a cool moment. But it didn't prompt you to be like, I'm staying to the end of Attack of the Clones. I'm staying to the end of Revenge of the Sith. Whereas now it's like, you got to check. Do I need to stay? Yeah. Do I don't? So that was the other really cool thing about this. Beside the scene being short and perfect. It really changed the way we think about these things.
But yeah, that's going to do it for our first dive into the MCU proper with Iron Man.
That was fun.
And I love that. That was a really good time. In a peek behind the curtain, I was wondering how we were going to do without doing the scene by scene, but I felt like we were able to cover the things we wanted to cover, within the episode.
Yeah, I think so.
So this has been fun. Normally we're going to jump into question of the week, but I do want to go ahead and say this for the people that have been listening. We definitely do love feedback. We were taking kind of a different spin with the way that we were doing a deep dive instead of it being scene by scene. We did this. Let me know what you all think, because we would definitely like to know how you would prefer longer form content to be analyzed, whether it be the scene by scene like Daredevil, or if you guys enjoyed this as well. So
yeah, please let us know, because we had a couple of ideas of how we wanted to break this down, and who knows, maybe we give one of those other ideas a shot, maybe we don't. Depends on y'all's feedback.
Yeah, so we would greatly appreciate that. But of course, we do have our question of the week. So Jude, my question of the week for you is, if you could choose any other superhero to kick off the Marvel Cinematic Universe, who would you choose?
I kept circling back to 2 characters, and I couldn't settle. Ant-Man or Black Panther.
Those are really good choices.
And I'm leaning towards Ant-Man.
Ant-Man, I think, would be good because of, and this sounds negative, but I truly mean it sincerely, but the novelty of the, like, he can grow smaller. Like, I think that's, like, acceptable.
Right.
For a general audience, like, because you got to keep in mind how much the audience has been taught to accept fantastical sides of the MCU.
Yeah.
And I think Ant-Man has that easy entry.
Well, not only that, like, the structure of the movie itself it's a heist film. You're going to steal. I mean, it's basically Ocean's 11 with superhero tech. Right? Like, you have your crew, you do your plan, you pull off the heist. Well, and everybody loves a heist film, right? But that's also, try to think of like what character, because that would be the flagship, right?
Mhm.
And that's why I kept going back to Black Panther, because that seems like a character that could be that flagship more so than Ant-Man. Because while Ant-Man's a heist film, it's also a comedy. And he does have that kind of comic relief role in the other movies he shows up in. And Black Panther's not that type of character. So that's why I kept circling back to those two. But then also what made it difficult for me was, if that was the first, the movie's probably also going to be very different, especially for Black Panther, because of his initial introduction being in Civil War. So,
Right.
What about you? I don't have to ask. It's Cap.
You would think it would be. And
I do think it is.
it's not, though.
Really?
I wanted it to be so much, but I was like, no, I'm not going to take the easy route, because it almost felt like cheating to choose one of the Phase 1 heroes, because they're essentially starter points anyway. So I was thinking about it. I just recently rewatched this movie, for the first time in a long time, and I was struck by how well I thought this was a great entry point for the MCU at large. It would be Doctor Strange. And I talked about how, you have to train the audience to accept the fantastical.
Right.
But I think the, no pun intended, magic of Doctor Strange is that it's surrounded by a character who's incredibly cynical about that kind of stuff. And he's the audience surrogate to step into that fantastical side of the MCU.
Right.
And
he gets eased in. Yeah.
And I think that would have been a great way to start the MCU other than Iron Man, because he really is kind of following that same Iron Man arc of like, here's a guy who's kind of, high on his own stuff, and he gets humbled and becomes a hero.
No, that's an excellent choice. I'm almost embarrassed I didn't think of it. And the only reason why I say almost is I really like my choices.
They're good choices too.
Yeah.
I really sincerely think they'd be a great place to start.
Yeah.
Like, I think that the whole, what makes a great starter point is easing the audience into the fantastical. And Ant-Man does that, and I believe Black Panther does as well, because at the heart of it, there's a whole larger cultural relevance to Black Panther other than just the hero powers. But when you take it as mechanics, it's it's a super soldier, strength.
Right. So let me ask you this: do you think Guardians of the Galaxy could work? Only because, like I know, I want to be careful here because we haven't reviewed it yet, and I want to save some of these thoughts for that review. But like the whole point, I think, of James Gunn using that music was to help the audience buy into that world and ease into it. It was familiar. But using that technique, do you think Guardians of the Galaxy could have done that? Or is that too far out there?
I think it could, but I think it wouldn't. So I think there's two parts you need. You need an ease into the fantastical and the promise of something more. And I think that Guardians of the Galaxy was kind of its own self-contained stuff that I don't know if it hooks the audiences early enough on to a promise of something more.
Okay. And that's good. That's fair.
If that makes sense. So.
No, it does, 100%.
But yeah, we'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to chime in with your thoughts on Iron Man, or who you think would have been a great hero to start with for the MCU, you can always reach us at MCU Need to Know on Twitter or Instagram. Or if you'd like to write us an email, you can reach us at mcuneedtoknow@gmail.com.
And I know we've already said this, but it really does help us when you leave a rating and a review and share with a friend. It builds the audience and brings the MCU to more people and great discussion.
Yeah, we'd greatly appreciate it. And finally, we'd like to give a special thanks to Nick Sandy for the use of his theme song, which is his rendition of the Avengers theme. You can find more of his music at his SoundCloud, which is linked in the description, and you should check it out. A lot of great music there.
Yeah, please go check him out so we can keep our theme song.
Stay tuned for the intag. All right, everybody, that's going to do it for this week. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for doing this, Jude.
Thank you, Trey.
We'll see you all next week. You're totally fine. It happens.
Yeah.
And I mean, they could still listen to it because, like Kiko said, they were listening to it at 75% when they normally listen to it at 25.
Yeah.
So it was listenable. It's just a minor
Yeah,
inconvenience.
no, and I'll fix it. But I don't know. Maybe they should go get their hearing checked. Maybe it's them.
Hey, look, I already pulled this once with Nick Sandy, and he threatened to take the theme song back.
Oh no.
Because I was like, hey, I just talked to Kiko so we could pinpoint whether or not, if this was just happening to you or if it was happening to everybody. And he was like, oh, sure, typical Trey, blame it on me. And I said, hey, look, I'm just trying to troubleshoot. It's not my fault. You're the trouble. And he goes, all right, well, I guess I'll take my theme song back. And we got ourselves an end tag.
Yep. That'd be so funny. And then the next week, you just hear us humming the end tag. Or not humming the theme. Not the end tag, the theme.
We get a low budget theme. Oh, that's great. I mean, you already were humming it last episode.
I know.
Okay.